So, you may remember this video of me draping from a few weeks ago, and this was about 3 days before I had to leave for New York, and only the second garment I'd ever attempted to drape on this new dress form, and my first ever corset I've ever made. And despite all that, I was actually successful in completing something, so I just wanted to go over what went well and what didn't go so well. I definitely do a bit of a rough draping technique, so if you sew a lot, just look away at this point. But after I have the general shape of each piece of half of the bodice, I trace each onto the parchment paper so that I have a pattern that I can reuse. I would also usually use that cotton that I draped with as a mock-up, but I did not have time for a mock-up in this case. And I had a thrifted curtain for the material for this project, and I lay everything out and just cut out all of the pieces. And no, I don't have fabric weights, so this is stuff from my bar cart. And after everything was cut out, I don't have much of that curtain left over. And those are the pieces, and you can see the first mistake I made here, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So the shell and the lining are then sewn together separately, right sides together, leaving that seam allowance because I'll use it for boning channels in the lining. And it was at this point that I really realized that I had damned myself with the material choice that I had made, because this material frays so badly, it's unbelievable. So I trimmed all of the unnecessary seams and used fray check. And it might look like I'm struggling a lot with this fray check, and that is in fact because I was, and I didn't know if this was just me or whatnot, but afterwards I cut the bottle open and saw that basically my entire new bottle of fray check was completely solid, and that was the issue, so I obtained a new bottle for the remainder of the project. And here's all those seams nicely cleaned up, and now we can bag line one side of the garment. And I don't think I've mentioned at this point, but basically the garment is two separate pieces because it closes in the back with eyelets and in the front with a corset lace up. And so we want those two pieces to be equal. So I went ahead and bag lined one side of the garment. Now I'm tracing it onto the other side so that they are even unsymmetrical on both sides. And I'm using blue tailor's chalk here, which is the appropriate choice. And going back to one of the biggest mistakes I made on this project, you can see here a faint red line, and that's because I, for some reason, used red ink pen to trace out my first pattern pieces, and the alcohol and the fray check also made that spread between layers. But moving on to the boning for the corset, despite this being the first corset I've ever made, I thought I would tackle steel boning, and this stuff is incredibly hard to cut, and then it has to be shaped and filed down so that it doesn't poke through the material. So this took a very long time to get each of the bones prepped. But we completed them and then slid them into each of their associated boning channels. And then it was on to the grommets for the lace-up